Hello friends, welcome back to Cloud Pedagogy. Now that we have a solid understanding of what Cloud9 is at a high level, let's get some hands-on experience using it in AWS. AWS Cloud9 is a web-based integrated development environment that allows you to write, run, and debug code in your web browser. This hands-on lab gives you the freedom and the time to get to know the AWS Cloud9 IDE services. This labs gives a brief understanding of Cloud9 for anyone who is planning to use AWS tools and their services to develop software and solutions. So first we will start with creating an environment in Cloud9 and then we will familiarize ourselves with the features of Cloud9. After that, we will create a simple Python file and run it in Cloud9. Finally, we will work on how to debug the Python file in the same environment. So let's start with the task 1, create an environment. Once we log into AWS user to the AWS console management page, we can navigate to the Cloud9 service offering or search for it. Since this is our first time using Cloud9, we will be provided with the description of the service and how to get started. Since we have already covered what Cloud9 is at higher level, let's just go ahead and create an environment. So I'm selecting the Create Environment button to get started. Every Cloud9 environment has a name that is used to classify what the environment is used for. So let's enter a name for it. On the environment settings screen, we can customize our environments to meet our needs. However, I want to note that for most Cloud9 environments, users typically just use the default environment settings. So the environment type section allows us to specify if we want to use EC2 or SSH connection for our Cloud9 interface. Essentially, this is asking if we want to use AWS or host Cloud9 somewhere else. You can provide SSH connection to an external instance and configure Cloud9 to run there. However, here we are going to use Amazon Cloud Infrastructure by leveraging the default value of running Cloud9 and EC2 instance. So next you specify instance type. For this we are going to use T2 micro instance size as it meets all the requirements we will need and typically fits within the AWS free tier to avoid charges. For the platform, I am going to use Linux 2023 AMI. AWS has cost saving setting enabled by default, which means that after a specified time period of inactivity, AWS terminates your Cloud9 instance. This is a great cost saving benefit because then you only pay for Cloud9 while you are actually using it. Let's have a look at network settings. When we launch in an EC2 instance, it launches into a VPC and there is a default, or we could create a new VPC and a new subnet. I'm just going to leave all of the other values as defaults on the screen, which will automatically provision an IAM role for us and use default works based on settings. As with most of the services, we have a service linked role. This allows Cloud9 to call other services on your behalf. Now our environment is ready to go. So let's select Create Environment to get it all started. We are then taken to the Cloud9 interface. Typically, it takes a few minutes for the AWS to provision the EC2 instance and install Cloud9 onto it. So let's take a second to wait for our environment to spin up. There is our Cloud9 instance. It's already running. It's just initializing right now, but this instance will house our environment. And remember, the key point is that it's set for 30 minutes of inactivity. So this server, if there is 30 minutes of inactivity, it will essentially go to a stopped state and you won't be charged. Perfect. Now our environment is loaded and ready to go. A lot of what we are doing right now is just configuring an EC2 instance as our Cloud9 environment server. Similar steps to just creating an EC2 instance from the EC2 management console. Good job. You have successfully configured a Cloud9 environment for your project. In the next task, we are going to familiarize about Cloud9 window. So in this task, before we start deploying the code, we will take a second to familiarize ourselves with the Cloud9 console. Since our environment is ready, let's open it. In the middle of Cloud9, we have our editor window. The editor window is a primary focused area of the IDE and is where you can create and edit code. The menu bar at the top of Cloud9 can be used for multiple commands such as creating new files, updating Cloud9 configurations, and customizing the view of the IDE to meet your needs. At the bottom of your screen, you have a terminal and immediate window. Cloud9 has a fully integrated terminal that allows you to execute standard Linux terminal commands and use the AWS CLI. The immediate window tab can be used to run and test small snippets of code within your environment during debugging sessions. On the far left, we have an Environments tab that contains a file explorer for all of the files within the Cloud9 instance. As we create new files and our application grows, here we will have additional files show up for easy navigation. On the right hand side, we have debugger windows. These are actually collapsed since we are not running an active debugging session. However, while we are debugging, these tabs will expand and be able to provide useful information to us about the active session. Good job! Now you have a clear understanding of the AWS Cloud9 window environment. In the next task, we are going to create a file and run the file in Cloud9. Great! Now that our environment is set up and running and we are oriented with Cloud9, we can start coding, running, and debugging the code. So in this task, we are going to write a quick hello world program within Cloud9 using Python. If you are unfamiliar with Python, don't worry. We will keep everything very simple within this lab. So create a program in a Python file in Cloud9 to write code in. We will start by selecting File drop-down in our menu bar. From here, we will select New from template to create a new file from one of the Cloud9's templates for its supporting programming languages. Let's then select Python to create an empty Python file. Now our code editor window has an empty Python file for us to code in. I'm just copying the script here. Alright, now our code is ready to go. So let's save this file. You can use menu bar again to save the file or just say Ctrl S. When prompted, I'm going to rename a file from untitled to cpapp.py. Now we can see our environment file system on the left hand side that our cpapp.py has now been saved in the root folder of our workspace. Directly left of our code, we can see the line numbers for each line of code we write. This section of the development environment is called gutter and can be used to set breakpoints and provide information to developers. We can see an information icon present in line 4 of our gutter. If we hover over it, we can see that it's indicating to us that our statement this line is missing indentation. Once we arrange it, we can see that the message immediately goes away. These informative notifications are a great benefit provided by coding in Cloud9 as they help developers write quality code and prevent bugs from entering the code base. Now we are ready to run our program. So let's press Run button here. In our terminal window, we can see that Hello World Welcome to Cloud Pedagogy was successfully outputted, meaning that our code executed properly. Notice that since we have used a Python code template when creating this file and saved the file cp-app.py, that we didn't have to create any running configuration for our code to execute properly. Cloud9 was able to automatically understand the programming language and feel that we want to execute and did so properly. So, great job! You were able to create a simple Python file and ran it in your newly created file successfully. In the task 4, we are going to debug this file. Well, now that we know how to run a program in Cloud9, let's try debugging. In our gutter, we can click to the left line of the line number to place a breakpoint. As you can see, breakpoints are visually represented with red circles. With our breakpoints set up, let's run our code by enabling Run in Debug Mode option next here in the terminal section of the file name, and then click on Run the file. We can see that our code has paused execution and has highlighted the second line to indicate it is paused on this line number within the debugging process itself. On the right hand side of our debugging window, it has expanded slightly to indicate we are in a debugging session. So let's drag this over a bit so we can get a better view of what's going on here. Our debugging window has a few useful options for us. Foremost at the top, it has the execution commands. These commands can be used to continue execution of the program. Here we can specify to run a single line of code, jump over a function call, jump into a function call, or even continue execution indefinitely until the program terminates or another breakpoint is set. Towards the bottom of our debugging window, we have a variable area that displays variables within our program and their current values for easy reference. In our debug window, we can also view a list of all breakpoints that we have defined in our application and the current call stack. You might be wondering why it's useful to have our call stack and breakpoints listed here, since it's easily visible in our editor window. Well, since we are only coding with a single file, these sections are not particularly helpful. However, when developing large applications with multiple files, these sections can be very helpful to have a better understanding of your environment. Debugging is one of the most important features of Cloud9. Our code is still paused in line 4, so let's press step over so that it continue our code execution to the next line. We can see that the yellow highlighted visual indicator shows that our code is now paused on line 5. If you take a quick peek at our variable section in the debugging window, we can see that hello string variable has now the value of hello world cloud pedagogy that is assigned to it. Also in Cloud9 during debugging sessions, you can quickly hover over the variables to view their current values. Now let's select the resume button to continue our code execution indefinitely. Now you can see our program has terminated and our debugging window is no longer visual and our variable was again printed into the console. Although this script example was quite simple, we have covered a lot of Cloud9 key functionality features. Good job! Now you know how to debug a file. Congrats, you have successfully completed the basic functionalities of Cloud9 features. Now you can leverage Cloud9 to build more complex and enterprise systems in the AWS cloud. So with that, I'll end this lab and thanks for joining me and I'll see you again in my next session. Until then, keep learning and take care.